So I'm Graham Henderson, and I'm pleased to welcome everybody here at this ungodly hour for the Global Music Forum. Music Canada has been sponsoring the Global Music Forum now for many years, and the reason that we do it is because we think that it is important to get people who are connected with our world in a meaningful, real way to talk about the problems that we face instead of worrying about being uploaded to the singularity, which I sort of learned about yesterday. So today's speakers, we're very, very honored to have them. Chris Castle has been our moderator for a number of years now. Chris is a dear friend of mine and one of the real great artist advocates that's out there. And we've certainly relied on him over the years, and we will probably do so for years to come. And so with that, Chris, I'm going to bring you up to the stage. Thank everybody for coming and enjoy the discussions.
Thank you, Graham. I think we should acknowledge that Graham has been inducted into the Singularity. I'm sorry, the Canadian Music Business Hall of Fame. So I'm going to say a little bit about our topic du jour, for which I'm going to need the slides up, so I'm going to try to do something about that, and nothing has happened. So those in the room back there somewhere? Ah, I see. Let's go back. So the topic du jour today is brand-sponsored piracy, which both David Lowery and Chris Ruen are going to talk about in different ways. But I want to give you sort of a little headline as to exactly what that means. Ockerville River had a great line, submit or be torrented. I think that sort of sets the tone for why this is important. So we had a bill in the U.S. Congress in the last session that was the result of Pandora believing that they were not making enough profit. Remember, there's a difference between revenue and profit. But they were not making enough profit, and so they wanted the Congress to reduce artist royalties, which are set by the Copyright Royalty Board under the authority of Congress in a similar way to a copyright tariff for resound would be set up here. Pandora didn't come to the music companies. They went to, I guess, what they perceived to be their more natural allies at the Consumer Electronics Association, the Computer and Communications Industry Association, the Digital Media Association, the Internet Association, the Net Coalition, and a variety of NGOs. They asked Ron Wyden, who was a sponsor of SOPA, which is something that Chris Ruen's going to talk about a bit, and Jason Chaffetz, who was also a sponsor of the corresponding bill in the House, to carry the legislation to reduce these royalty rates. That drew, for the first time, I would say, widespread artist protest. There were a number of artists of all walks who came together in an advertisement and in a letter writing campaign to oppose this bill. Pandora then took that as a cue that they should go to ASCAP rate court because, you know, why leave the songwriters out, and try to get songwriter royalties reduced on Pandora. And that drew broad-based songwriter protests just to sort of complete the picture. But underlying all this is this issue of brand-sponsored piracy, because what happens, I think, is Pandora's ad revenue, their CPMs, is lower, partly because major brands are buying advertising on pirate sites that offer the identical music that's also available on legitimate sites like Pandora. So you can see that if you're a brand and you have a chance to buy what's often priced at remnant advertising rates and reach essentially the same audience of that sort of 15 to 34 golden group, why would you pay more if you could pay less? So it's interesting also that this pirate site inventory is often referred to in the advertising trade as high-risk inventory, with no explanation apparently being necessary as to what high risk refers to, perhaps high risk of being caught. Google would like you to believe that this high-risk inventory is just cheap remnant ads, there's nothing to see here, move along, you know, no problems, right? So here's an example of high-risk inventory at work. This is the page from MP3 Crank, which is a pirate MP3 site, in response to the search results for the Drive soundtrack. So we went into MP3 Crank, search for the Drive soundtrack, and what did we find? Ads for BMW, ads for Equifax, which in our country determines your credit score, which determines whether you get a car loan. So buying ads from pirate sites basically allows brands and their ad agencies to reach music fans at bargain prices, drives down revenues to legitimate sites like Pandora, which drives up royalties as a percentage of profits, particularly if you're paying your CEO $750,000 a year, which is another story. And that causes legitimate services to try to reduce royalties to increase their profits, so the artist gets it twice. They get it when their work is pirated, and they get it when the long-term economic effects of the piracy causes people to want to reduce their royalties. Here's another one in the submit or be torrented theme. This is Beyonce, ads for the Super Bowl halftime show that just happened, sponsored by Pepsi, on the illegal site Lyrics 007, which were served in response to a search for Adele Skyfall. Now, none of you will be surprised to know that Lyrics 007 is based in Burbank. No, actually, it's based in China. And then, of course, this is a recent addition to the pack. You'll notice that brand up in the top is Chevrolet, promoting the HTML5 version, which is essentially the mobile version of Groove Shark, a company with which we've all had some problems, I think, in the music business. So what do the brands do when you catch them at this? The Tricordist, which is David Lowery's site, he's going to talk about some more, his blog, has, and we on Music Tech Policy also have made something of a cottage industry of finding these things and displaying them in ways that would probably make the brands feel uncomfortable, which is, of course, kind of the idea. So let's take a few examples. BMW immediately responded, said we're going to do something about it. Electronic Arts didn't even get to a second letter. They responded immediately. Guitar Center responded immediately, and I'll show you their response in just a minute. And Levi's also responded. The Levi's response is really more in reaction to a study that's being conducted at the USC Annenberg School now about brand-sponsored piracy, who is doing the advertising and which ad networks are delivering the ads. So the flow of this is brand, ad agency, ad exchange, or ad network, pirate. And that's, so when you say you tell the ad agency to stop, the reason you do that is because everybody in that chain will tell you, oh no, it couldn't be me because I have a contract that says that such things can't happen. Yet, they do. So the response from Guitar Center was, I wanted to reach out and let you know that the ad buy was made on our behalf. We didn't touch it. No, it was someone else who we hired, and we told them not to do that. It was made on our behalf by a third party that serves up retargeting ads for our brands. Retargeting ads are typically kind of the remnant ads. We have reached out and had ForShared, which was the subject of the complaint, blocked from our retargeting publishers list. So what that means is there's a list that exists at the ad agency that's something like a blacklist that is something they can use to keep their ads from being served on certain sites. So great news, of the 150,000 sites that are out there in the Google Transparency Report that, that sell pirate inventory, one was taken off of the Guitar Center list. But it's progress nonetheless, and we appreciate it. So the response from Levi's was a little more involved, but you'll notice the recurring theme. We knew nothing about it. It's a serious problem. We reached out to our ad agency. Both cases, they reached out to an ad agency, so that would lead you to think maybe it's starting to become a theme here that the ad agency might know something about it. OMD, which is a gigantic ad agency, and immediately had them remove the ads. So nobody seems to know anything about it, yet people seem to have control over it, and when they're called on it, they're able to get rid of it. Just note that quote was in the LA Times. I'm not saying having stories in the mainstream media about your company serving ads to pirate sites would encourage anyone to remove their ads from pirate sites, but I noticed the connection nonetheless. And then here we have United Airlines on H33T. For those of you who follow this stuff, you'll remember H33T is a site that was blocked in the UK recently. United Airlines, right there, flying the friendly skies. Response from United Airlines when asked about it? Crickets. Here's our friends at Lyric 007 again, Maroon 5, Harder to Breathe. Look over there in the right-hand corner, McDonald's. Response from McDonald's? Crickets. No one wants to take responsibility for it, you see. And then response from General Motors, that is government motors, and Canadians and Americans in this room have something in common when it comes to Chevrolet, which is we both bailed them out. And their response was, sponsor Groove Shark. Your tax dollars and mine at work. The response from Google is more sophisticated, as we would expect. To the extent that there is a suggestion that Google ads are a major source of funds for a major pirate sites, we believe it is mistaken. So let's look at that. A major source of funds for major pirate sites. Well, does that mean they're a minor source of funds for major pirate sites or a major source of funds for minor pirate sites? What does that mean exactly? And why is it that you only believe it is mistaken? You are, after all, Google. You are organizing the world's information, whether the world likes it or not. You don't know, right? So you see there's a lot of kind of fluff in this stuff. I would point out that in the mega video indictment, and for those of you who were here a couple of years ago when Ellen Seidler sort of unknowingly foreshadowed what was going to happen to Mega Video and Mr.com. In the Mega Video indictment, it says, originally the Mega Video conspiracy had contracted with companies such as AdBright, Google AdSense, and Party Gaming for advertising. Currently, the company's own advertising network is used to set up advertising campaigns on all the Mega sites. Note, that does not mean that those companies are not still serving ads to the Mega Video network. It just means that Mega Video decided they wanted to make more money and probably had their own ad sales team. I would imagine that's where that's going to end up. So this is a very serious problem. So the solution that Pandora chose was, of course, pay songwriters and artists even less to increase their profits. I'd offer a different path. Tricortis is got a petition calling on brands to stop participating in this activity. And I think I can speak for David that Pandora and Spotify are invited to sign that petition right here, right now. We can do it right here, right now, if there's anybody from Pandora or Spotify in the room. I don't know why they wouldn't want to sign it. I would think it would only be in their interest to sign it, because of that. Why would you want to allow that to flourish when that ad should be on your network? So just to set the tone, submit or be torrented is sort of the theme that I in my mind at least, we'll be thinking about today. So our two speakers, let's introduce them, are David Lowery, who is a mathematician, writer, musician, producer, serial entrepreneur based in Richmond, Virginia, and Athens, Georgia. He is the founder of Cracker and Camper Van Beethoven. He has many achievements in the music business, and as a producer, he produced artists like Counting Crows and Sparkle Horse. Also founded Sound of Music Studios with John Morand, and has many different credits in the music business. He recently founded a blog called The Tricordist, which examines artists' rights from the point of view of developing an ethical internet. He has recently, or a blog post that he had on the Tricordist that some people have heard of was called Letter to Emily, which was a response to an NPR intern's post on All Songs Considered, which I'll let him tell a little bit more about. He's also a economics and finance professor at the University of Georgia in the music business program, and supervises the Athens Angel Investment Fund. So his economic analysis of the music business, which was called Meet the New Boss, Worse Than the Old Boss, it should be of some interest to everyone. So on that, I'd like to introduce David and ask him to come up and give us his presentation today. Thank you.
I'm more comfortable carrying a microphone like this. The thing about me and the music business is that I feel like I was an involuntary draftee in the music business. I was a mathematician and a computer guy, and me and my friends, we played in bands. And one day we decided to start our own record label, put out our own record, simply for our friends, and before I knew it, I was in the music business. That was in 1985. I feel like I have a lot of experience in not only in the music business, but also in the technology business, and running companies that basically more or less make a profit most of the time, which is something rare in the technology business. So, here's the 1950s music business. I think that's T-Bone Walker there on the left. So say when an old bluesman like T-Bone Walker maybe drove up to Memphis to get a record deal, there were a couple things that he might expect from the record company. Might expect some promotion for his albums, and in lieu of transparency and actual royalties, would be given a Cadillac every once in a while, in lieu of those things, right? It's kind of the old, I don't know if this happened to T-Bone Walker, but these stories are fairly well known about the 1950s music business. And I have a personal connection to this part of the music business. My mother-in-law worked for Sam Phillips at Sun Records. And she met my father-in-law because he was a car dealer who was involved in the other half of this exchange. So I know this part of the music business really well. So largely, for a long time, we had a march of progress from this kind of music business to another kind of music business that treated artists more fairly and had maybe not the best transparency, but a greater bit of transparency. So today, this is a digital music business. It's just like the 1950s music business, but you don't get the Cadillac, okay? We are now free as artists because we don't have the hassle of receiving a Cadillac. And in fact, it's even worse. Here we have this company, Groove Shark, which has my entire catalog on their service, available for streaming. They've never asked my permission, nor have I ever received any proper accounting or royalties, right? So what we have now is even worse than that, because we have the Cadillac is now paying the guys that rip us off. Do you see how backwards this has become? Okay? And we're asked to accept this in the name of freedom, in the name of liberty. You can always tell scoundrels in politics, right? They always talk about freedom. And by the way, you know, like I said, Chris already said, hammered the point, but that's basically our tax dollars, Canadian and American, financing the people who exploit artists. Look, I've been in this business a long time, and I'm not an idiot. We're never going to end music piracy on some level, whether it's kids in bedrooms swapping stuff, whether it's gangsters bootlegging DVDs and selling them at flea markets and stuff like that. Doesn't matter. The difference, though, is, and the music business has always worked with some degree of piracy. The difference is that we can function with a Sicilian level of corruption, but it's a bit difficult to function with a total Somalian free-for-all level of dysfunction in the marketplace. If we can move it back towards 1999, a lot of progress would be made for artists. First of all, there is this myth that I must explode, that we are looking for a new model. You know what? Most artists that I know are relatively intelligent. They know how to run a business, right? And I would think that 15,000 semi-professional artists in the music business, if there was a new model, we would have found it. If there was a new model that was better for creators, we would have found it with the digital distribution. But what we really have, the digital distribution model that we have right now, is what we have. It's the status quo. It's relatively stable. The new model is here. It doesn't work great for creators, okay? There are 3 components to this. It's been relatively stable for 8 years. There's file sharing, BitTorrent, and cyberlockers, which are advertising supported, largely. There is streaming, which includes YouTube, Spotify, Pandora, Groove Shark, which are also advertising supported. As Chris pointed out, both of these things are competing for the same money. If this second one is going to be the future of the music business, access to music, streaming music, artists are mandated a share of that advertising revenue. If that advertising revenue is pushed down by oversupply in the marketplace, oversupply of publishers, artists are going to get less. Digital music services are going to get less. Finally, iTunes and Amazon and the legitimate white hat digital retailers do not exist in a vacuum. They got to price artists' music against this background of Somalian level piracy, okay? This all works together to depress the wages and the revenue that artists receive. Okay. A lot of people don't realize this. Just to back up for a second, free music, books, and films are highly monetized. Kim.com would pay people to upload, well, it appears he would pay people to upload files that were popular and then charge people a premium subscription to download these files faster. But he also sold a lot of advertising. We all know, by the way, Kim.com comes to our website, reads our website sometimes. And what we do is we pretend like we don't know who he is and ask him to post under his comments under his real name, because we don't allow pseudonyms. It's actually pretty funny. But anyway, he says, "Dear copyright extremists." So we always refer to ourselves as copyright extremists at the Tricordis now. Okay, so Kim.com's a sociopath. He'll say whatever he needs to say to justify what he's doing. But it is a little surprising that, for instance, Google, DoubleClick, and not just to single out Google, it's just that they're the biggest ones, and they're the ones who seem most sensitive to my criticisms. So I think I've detected a soft spot. Google and many other Fortune 500 companies run advertising networks that monetize this free music. Graham Henderson, a while back, in his blog, ran a piece on Carly Rae Jepsen's "Call Me Maybe" song, where he did a Google search for it, and he showed that on the first page, there were no legitimate download links. The first page of Google search results, right? No legitimate links except for the two YouTube properties right there, which Google has been demonstrated push to the top of search results to benefit their other property, YouTube. So there's no legitimate links here on this first page of search results. No iTunes, no Amazon with all their genius SEO. Nothing legitimate there, okay? Now, the red arrows, I went a step farther and I clicked on these links, and using a thing called Firebug, I examined the source code, or the served source code, very carefully. Every one of those red links, Google managed to monetize those page views by serving ads on those pages, or with the YouTube videos, there's ads served there. The blue links, it appears to me from the source code, from the served source code that I collected, that they attempted to serve ads, or they had some sort of financial relationship with the website. But in this case, in the time that I clicked it on it, there was no monetization that actually took place, just an indication that there was an attempt. The one crossed out there actually isn't even the right file. I just crossed it out. So, and here you go. Here's source code. Here's the Firebug. That snippet of code there throws that banner ad up at the top. Now, a lot of people are surprised that a Fortune 500 company would do something that's seemingly illegal, but I don't know if you know that Google, in their non-prosecution agreement, which means somebody go to jail prosecution agreement, not a civil prosecution, somebody go to jail, they paid $500 million for knowingly working with these online pharmacy, non-prescription drug pharmacies. So it's not surprising to see Google involved in this, considering that this happened. Anyway, here's the point. It's really what Chris is saying. When there's an oversupply of publishers, you're going to drive ad revenue down. So if we end ad-supported piracy, I feel this is a no-brainer. It's an easy fix. Doesn't even involve any sort of new laws, government regulation, or anything like that. It's a no-brainer. And it's something that brands, digital music services in Silicon Valley, and artists all benefit. So I would like to see us move forward to fixing this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I'm now going to introduce Chris Ruen, who's an author from Brooklyn. His essays and criticisms have appeared in the New York Times, Slate, the New York Press, and Stereo Gum. He's a former contributing editor for Cooler magazine and has covered music culture for Tiny Mixtapes based in Minneapolis. He has written a book, which is sort of the reason why he's here today, called Freeloading: How Our Insatiable Appetite for Free Content is Starving Creativity, which was published last year by OR Books in the US and in Canada. And the book will be published in Australia and New Zealand by Scribe Publications this coming March, which would mean it would be out this coming March, right? Yeah, okay. This currently existing March in the singularity, yes. Okay. We have a couple of plugs for the book. One from David Byrne, a wonderful book that catches an encouraging shift in the zeitgeist, and from the Sydney Sun Herald, a deeply moral and passionate book. I'm glad that he's here today and was able to join us, and so I will give you Chris Ruen.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Forgive me for kicking it old school, as it were, with the analog paper for my speech today. And I'd like to thank Graham Henderson and everybody at CMW for having me up from my home in Brooklyn, that now world-renowned, world-famous utopia of the creative class, where video artists and artisanal food trucks roam free like gazelles on the plains of Africa. So as Chris mentioned, I wrote a book, Freeloading, and in some ways, I'm not sure how I fit in to gatherings like this, because I'm not of the music industry. I never worked for the music industry. I'm not a professional musician like as David is. And really, I see myself as, in some ways like a struggling young musician, except in the publishing field. I'm just a writer who happens to be a lifelong music fan, independently trying to sort this issue out, an issue that's bedeviled us for well over a decade now. And I'm hoping to engage some new thoughts, some new discussion, and to stir the pot a bit, and hopefully make some positive contribution. Anyway, my entry into this debate was organic and quite personal. About 3 years ago, I was working at a cafe in Brooklyn, as one would expect of a young writer living in Brooklyn. And it happened to be a cafe where lots of well-known musicians were regulars. They had rehearsal spaces or just lived in the neighborhood. So TV on the radio, The Hold Steady, MGMT, Vampire Weekend, Yesayer, Blonde Redhead, a number of these bands and musicians were just around. And I got to know some of the artists from these bands, and I was surprised to find out how little money they seemed to be making. And it really surprised me, because I was really coming at music culture from the perspective of a fan who, I think like a lot of fans, when you see someone getting a lot of coverage, selling out venues, you assume, oh, they must be making a lot of money. They must be doing great. They're successful. And I found that all was not as it appeared on the mediated surface. And I started to think and reevaluate my own generation. I was a freshman in college the year Napster peaked at 70 million users worldwide. And, I freeloaded music, as I call it, or pirated music, as did all of my friends. And we pirated all the music that we could. We never asked questions about justification. We were told that free music represented the future, and that future would be better for up-and-coming artists. We were told that the only people piracy hurt were those who didn't need money anyway. They were rich artists and rich corporate labels who, quote, didn't understand technology. But my immediate experience in Brooklyn suddenly demonstrated the fallacy that was going on. And once I was closer to the creative community, I saw that artists, as much as it's in some ways fun and inviting to put them on a pedestal as, some inhuman vessels of, some sacred spirit, which in some cases they are, at the end of the day, they are struggling, working people, and that very few amass great wealth, and very few much less a teacher's salary. So why didn't musicians deserve, at the very least, respect for their own choice of how to distribute their work? This really troubled me at the time, and I started studying it further, and started writing about it. And what really struck home with me was the fact that the artist voice and the artist in general, in the process of the piracy wars playing out, had really been left out of the debate. It was a voice that wasn't heard very much. Now, after the Napster controversy, Jonathan Taplin predicted that, okay, Lars Ulrich, he's very easy to portray as some out-of-touch old guy, but, he predicted, when Ray Charles or Aretha Franklin raises their voice about piracy, people are going to view this in a different way. Of course, we all know that that never happened. After Metallica was tarred and feathered, a culture of fear developed where artists were, arguably afraid to stick their necks out, and that created a vacuum in the debate. And within that vacuum, where artists would be advocating for themselves and making it clear to fans what side they were on, major labels were left alone to defend artists' rights and were easily portrayed as self-serving by those who wanted the issue to be about corporate control of culture rather than the real issue, which is establishing basic fairness in the marketplace of creativity in the internet age. In the process, people would beat up on labels while saying that piracy actually helped artists in some magical fashion. A basic fact wasn't communicated to fans, and the basic fact is that artists choose to partner with record labels. If they didn't, record labels wouldn't exist. Now, to anyone in the industry, this is a fact so obvious, perhaps it doesn't seem worth mentioning. It is an incredibly, incredibly obvious point. But, as it so happens, that fact was something fans of my generation, and arguably of the generation that's following me, weren't forced to confront as they rationalized away piracy. They weren't forced to confront the reality that by hurting the label the artist has chosen to partner with, the artist is being hurt as well, and their opportunities for the future are being hurt. So in my personal experience, when you recognize the artist in these debates and place them at its center, not just in rhetoric, but in reality, these issues become simplified in the mind of the customer or the consumer. Once they recognize that the music they are enjoying wasn't destined to be made, it was made by a person or people of flesh and blood who, in all likelihood, are broke, a lot of the heady digital fanaticism seems to fade away. The question as to whether or not artists deserve some basic fairness from the marketplace becomes rather uncontroversial. Stray from the working reality of artists, and it becomes just another battle from the perspective of fans between two entrenched industries. And that's not exactly something music fans are going to invest themselves in, not that kind of a debate. So by language and concepts that we all use in this debate, we can make a more resonant argument and turn the page forward, one hopes, to something that resembles resolution of these issues. And that's the reason I suggest freeloading is a better word, literally and figuratively, than piracy or file sharing. Free downloading, as in free plus downloading, but also the dictionary definition of freeloading, which is taking advantage of others' generosity without offering anything in return. That term acknowledges the creator and a fan's relationship to that creator. And I also think it's important that we find more simple and yet accurate ways also of talking about copyright. Copyright does have a very long and complex history, and I'm sure we can all find areas of disagreement in regards to how it should or should not be implemented. I'm sure we all have different thresholds for which we may think copyright can go too far. But when communicating to the public and also to artists who, in many cases, are just as confused as anyone on these issues, I suggest a simplified explanation of what copyright means in practical terms. It's the right not to be ripped off. A few months ago, Beach House, the band from Baltimore, they were approached by an advertising company in the UK who wanted to use one of their songs, and Beach House was not comfortable with using their music for an advertisement, so they said no. And very soon after, the advertisement appeared with a song that sounded eerily similar to the very song that this advertising company was attempting to license. And I was interested to read in Pitchfork, the music blog, a story about this where they talked about Beach House being ripped off. Now, I just think it's an interesting thing to note that, at least in my experience as being a pretty obsessive follower of music culture, I don't think I've ever seen a prominent music blog address freeloading with the same language. And it's just interesting because essentially the same thing is going on. People are getting ripped off. And that's why placing this spotlight today on brand-sponsored piracy is so important. It makes it painfully obvious that artists continue to be ripped off by some of the most powerful companies in the world. So, you know, how heinous is this, as detailed in David's presentation? And what is the argument for allowing websites and ad networks, not to mention search engines and ISPs, to go on profiting, as they have for many years now, on the back of working artists without offering them anything in return? It's important in these debates to look for distinctions, because people have a tendency to conflate the internet revolution with piracy and make it seem as though in order to embrace technology, you also have to accept piracy. This is a fallacy. And Dropbox, for example, has figured out a way to offer cloud storage without running terribly afoul of rights holders. RapidShare may not be perfect, but they are certainly providing a strong example that to be seen as a legitimate service means accepting certain rules of the road. And keeping these examples of legitimate services in mind, you know, I think we should look at these storage lockers, torrent trackers, and indexes that show themselves to be dedicated to ripping off artists, and we should accept them for what they are. They are commercial black markets. Today, David demonstrated the money trail that funds mass freeloading, and it seems clear that Google is unwilling to voluntarily address the problem in their failure to effectively downgrade known pirate sites in their search results as they promised recently they would. It seems to me that we know what the problem is. Even Google's UK compliance manager, Theo Bertram, admitted last summer that the most effective form of copyright enforcement, quote, is to go after the money, to remove the financial underpinnings, the advertising, the payment processes from foreign sites that knowingly distribute illegitimate content, as reported by Digital Music News. Google's own chief economist, Hal Varian, writes in his book, this is something that the Triacordist reported on, the book is Information Rules. So Google's own chief economist talked about bitleggers. You know, basically this is the same group of people, these black markets that we're talking about today. And he also has this interesting quote: digital piracy can't be eliminated any more than any other kind of illegal activity, but it can be kept under control. All that is required is the political will to enforce intellectual property rights. And, you know, let's add something else into this formula here, or you know, what's happening. And remember that when Mega Upload was shut down, there was a domino effect, and a pretty serious one. And some of the sites that closed down in the aftermath cited the shifting legal terrain. So enforcement, you know, people are paying attention, and if it's shown that enforcement has consequences, the incentives change, and you know, the business models or the prospect for profits changes for these companies. So if copyright enforcement is to be meaningful, the commercial black markets we discussed today, they must be dealt with one way or another. And I would argue that known black markets deserve to be placed on black lists. SOPA, Stop Online Piracy Act, so controversial. You know, I had problems with SOPA. There were some cases where I think it went too far, but it did provide a model for dealing with this problem. in regards to establishing some sort of blacklist for black markets. SOPA included a concrete mechanism for identifying foreign-based black market sites, then notifying advertising networks and payment processors to stop doing business with them. This would have established clear rules of the road for US-based internet commerce moving forward, and it would have marginalized unlicensed digital distributors in the process, while giving legitimate digital content markets a fair chance to develop and compete, which is really what we're trying to push for today. So, one thing I didn't like about SOPA was the private right to action, and I would say, for all the fears that people had about that legislation or any kind of blacklist legislation, if it is coming from the government, leave it to the Justice Department to bring evidence against these sites with damaging political consequences dealt to the executive branch if overreach does occur. And also I would really say that it's important for us to tackle SOPA and the aftermath and the entire context of that law and how it was treated head on. We shouldn't be afraid of talking about it. When you really look at what happened with the protest and the blackout, effectively millions of internet users roused themselves from sleep one morning, then turned on their computer screens and smartphones as per usual. They were greeted by blacked out logos and startling warnings about a hitherto unknown law called SOPA, warned by trusted internet brands that the anti-piracy, anti-counterfeiting law would imperil their favorite sites, stifle innovation, censor, and even break the internet. These users filled out form petitions and called lawmakers, parroting spoon-fed talking points. As it turns out, I would argue, SOPA wasn't the distillation of pure evil it was made out to be, nor was the successful blackout protest an open and shut case of grassroots goodness as it was reported to be. The SOPA blackout was in fact a textbook example of how to prey on the biases of an uneducated public, incite them with misinformation, and corral the resulting mob for one's own devices. Fight the Future, a 501c4 group that was founded the same month SOPA was introduced in Congress, proposed the blackout idea, developed its infrastructure, and organized with Reddit, Google, and other tech industry stakeholders, beginning with a meeting at Mozilla headquarters on November 9th, 2011. And I have a lot of details about how this all played out in my book. The Media Democracy Fund. And so it's a 501c4, and then they got an additional $700,000 or so after the blackout was as successful as it was. And it's a 501c4, so they're under no obligation to disclose their donors. So much for openness. Fight for the Future literally invented facts and repeatedly misrepresented the law's aims, saying the legislation would threaten Twitter or Facebook when mass distributors of unlicensed content based overseas, like the Pirate Bay, or formerly Mega Upload, were the clear targets. Ends justify the means paranoia baiting was the oxygen that fueled the successful blackout. So if meaningful enforcement is to happen, we can't run from SOPA or shy away from attacking the rhetoric that fueled it, much of which looks downright silly once the case is made that black markets were its target, not freedom fighters. If you don't like legislative prescriptions, Fred Wilson, who is the co-founder of Union Square Ventures, a venture capital firm in New York, certainly someone who understands technology, he suggested a voluntary model for a blacklist where an independent group would be deciding which sites deserve to be put on such a list, and there'd be a pop-up window where internet users would be warned this is a pirate site. Now, he also admits, he says Google should do this, but they're not going to. So I would love it if there could be a non-legislative solution, but given the incentives that are built into this, I'm not terribly hopeful, but hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong. Anyway, obviously, if there is going to be some kind of a blacklist, the really difficult part is going to be determining standards for what constitutes a black market and figuring out where and how to draw the line. And that will be difficult. Let's go full circle here. The example of the Internet Radio Fairness Act was a really powerful one because artists really did drive the effort to kill that bill, and David did a hell of a lot of great work in pressuring Pandora on that front. But in terms of black markets, black lists, if we can find an agreeable solution that can be communicated to the public and give artists something they can stand before their fans and say they support, I actually feel it'd be possible to solve these issues fairly quickly. So success going forward to me means artists, labels, and legitimate services like Pandora and Spotify and Apple, iTunes, all pulling in the same direction. And I would say that, again, the formula for that is greater artist involvement from respected artists. Michael Girard from Swans, he's been very clear on being against piracy. So, that's the kind of voice that no serious music fan is going to argue with. So, now the great thing is that getting more people involved is something we can all do right now by signing the petition on brand-sponsored piracy. This is an important starting point to form a new coalition for a new paradigm, for a new internet. One where it isn't taken for granted with a wink and a nod that today's artists are destined to be ripped off. Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys. We're going to have a little time for Q&A here, but while you're thinking of your questions, I have a question. You both sort of touched on a couple of points here. One is that the artists need to get involved, and that if we stay outside the government, going to the government to solve our problem, that there's still plenty of things that individuals can do. So let me give you a couple of examples. Some artists have been starting to develop contract language in their tour riders, and which I've actually heard some people want to put it in sponsor agreements that says you won't advertise my tour on a pirate site, or I won't participate in your brand sponsorship deal, like a Beyonce, for example, in the Super Bowl, if this shows up on a pirate site. And what do you think about that idea? That's something artists can do. It's easy to do. I doubt anybody's going to sue over it, but it certainly, to me, starts a conversation. Does that sound like something that could make sense to you guys?
Well, we already have that language in our contracts now for Cracker and Camper Van Beethoven, that the promoters can't advertise on these infringing sites, these freeloading sites. So we're certainly all for that, and we're trying to get other artists to follow with us and do this as well.
So, Chris, to some of your comments would suggest that these kind of informal activities, kind of more consumer, almost nadir-ish type activities, might have a beneficial effect and keep it outside the government. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, I think it's ideal. The question is it realistic, and is it going to do the job and actually solve the problem in an efficient manner? If you're thinking about commercial markets and government involvement, the government's role and the role of law is to regulate for desired incentivize desired outcomes. So if there are incentives to continue to make money off of other people's work, I feel like people are going to keep doing that unless there is a rising tide of public sentiment. And I think the tour rider idea is a great one, but I sort of see the problem as one where artists are still confused in their own right about these issues, and confused as to who the bad guy is and whether piracy is a bad thing. Some artists don't want to take a position on it. And I think also they're afraid of pissing off their fans still to some degree.
Privately, I'll tell you this, privately most artists really would much prefer like 100% that people buy their music legitimately. And yes, thanks for buying the t-shirt on tour, but we're never going to beat, artists are never going to beat Hot Topic at selling and designing t-shirts. We're musicians, so almost 100%, everybody I talk to wants fans to buy the music. That's their preferred way of making revenue. I'm not against like government regulation. I just not realistically see. I don't realistically see that happening in the United States, given that companies like Google basically have 2 lobbyists for every member of Congress in Washington, D.C. I mean, I don't know how we're supposed to get past that.
Can I say one quick thing? Well, just that, I mean, it's absolutely true what you're saying about artists, but I think what's kind of unpredictable in this debate is how public sentiment could be shifted, because I think that's still why those artists you're talking about aren't being more vocal. And that could happen in a surprising way, where all of a sudden, if the right argument is being presented to the public in regards to these sites, things could shift into an entirely different direction.
Well, let me address that specifically, though. I mean, Lars's head was put on a stake outside of the city's gate after Napster, right? And this is what happens to anyone who speaks out. And that message was extremely powerful. I mean, some of the artists that participate with me at the Tricortis are anonymous specifically for that reason. I don't give a shit, and I have my own money, so aside from just my music money, so I'm perfectly willing to speak out. So I have this luxury that a lot of other artists don't have. And actually, being the data guy, I carefully tracked what happened to sales, radio play, concert tickets, and all the social media metrics for my bands since I started speaking out a year ago, and nothing bad happened. In fact, there was a slight increase overall in all of those metrics. So basically, if you piss off people who don't pay for music, guess what? They don't pay for music. So
great.
Well, nothing bad happens.
Let's take a question here. Did I see David Baskin out there?
Thank you very much. Chris, I read your book. It's excellent. I recommend everyone do the same. I got mine on Kindle. And the Tricortis is must reading. There's no question. And this is, as so often, an essential panel. From the Canadian perspective, we don't have to worry too much about what government will or won't do, because our government won't do anything. As Bill C-11 demonstrated, the Canadian government is not the friend of the music industry, at least when it comes to piracy. They're pretty much in the pocket of the cable companies, the phone companies, and those who are their friends. It's essentially impossible to do anything about piracy from a governmental perspective at this point. Perhaps it will change. I hope it does. But it seems to me that there's a great deal of power in the hands of individuals. I turned all my browsers away from Google. I don't use Gmail. I won't use any Google services. Now, Google is a company that has been shown in the past to be sensitive to public pressure, at least in its early days when it was busy bending over for the government of China, which it may still do, I don't know. But it seems to me that one message that could be folded into what you're doing is to say Google is not your friend, and it's not the only service around. Bing isn't all that bad. There are other services. It seems to me that if musicians who are opposed to the facilitation of advertising on pirate sites would get together and say, don't do business with Google, they're not acting in your interest, at least it could begin to add to the groundswell of notoriety that we all want to see attached to this kind of activity. There are alternatives. You don't have to use Google. And I think if everybody at every opportunity took the chance to say, these guys who would like to run a music service in Canada, but they don't yet because we haven't licensed them, these guys make far more money serving up ads to pirate sites than they will ever make in the legitimate sale of music. Brings me to one more question. Why do record labels license their tracks to Google? Why do business with somebody who with one hand wants to be your friend, but with the other hand, in which is a club, he wants to do damage to you? Why do business with people like this?
Oh, I can answer that. One reason is because it has gotten to the point that the industry revenues have been hopefully changing now, but remains to be seen. The industry revenues have been driven down far enough that the advances from YouTube and the revenues from YouTube are actually a significant contribution to the bottom line. And so this fact is not lost, on the payor of those monies. It's getting a little tougher, to deal with them. Plus, you've got Vivo, there's starting to be more integration of Google into the legitimate music business. On the other hand, some people refer to Google Play as the Google version of the Genco olive oil company, for you Godfather fans out there. But I think that's part of the answer. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Can we get a mic down here? There we go, right behind you.
Thanks very much. My name's Olaf Furness. I'm a journalist, amongst other things. I have a lot of sympathy with copyright being abused. Billboard syndicated my work without my permission and told me I should be grateful for the exposure, so that was the last I ever wrote for them. But one of the questions I'd really like to ask David is if you know how much has been made in terms of suing file sharers and suing people illegally selling or providing your downloads, and how much money as an artist you've received off that.
I don't think I received any. I don't know anything about that business. And actually, if you look, I mean, seems to be a few of these judgments every year. But I mean, if you're getting at the idea that the music business is making a lot of money off of suing people, I have some land in Florida I'd like to sell you. So.
No, I mean, I raise it as a serious thing because in Germany, for example, they've sent out standard letters and people just pay up. And this money, as far as I know, isn't going to the artists. It's going to the lawyers and it's going to the record companies.
Well, yeah, and I don't know how much the record companies are getting out of that, but the idea is what I will support about that, I mean, I don't know about suing people, but there should be some sort of simple penalties for this. I mean, I watched the first week. I have a fairly sophisticated monitoring system that I use, and I watched the first week my last Camper Van Beethoven album was out. I watched one seed on BitTorrent distribute more copies of the album than were legally sold. And, that ISP that was protecting the identity of that person refused, doesn't cooperate with artists, especially independent artists that they think don't have any deep pockets that won't sue them. They were sadly mistaken with me. Yeah, I mean, in France they've done this Hadopi thing, which is, I don't know how you pronounce it, but Hadopi?
Hadopi.
Hadopi, okay. It looks like, the early indications are, it looks like it's discouraging file sharing, and there is some penalty in that somehow. And I think that's
all right,
helpful.
So let me put this question another way, because it's obviously not been answered. If the record companies are successfully suing file sharers and a lot of money is being generated out of that, would you like to see artists getting a cut of that?
If there was a lot of money being made out of it, I can't imagine there's a lot of money being made out of it.
There have been distributions it takes a while, but there have been distributions off of like the LimeWire and Kazaa and some of the big settlements. There have been distributions.
What's the split?
Well, it's based on a pro rata. My understanding is that it's based on a pro rata share of what's left after they pay the cost. But there's the point you're making, maybe not the point. The point I would like you to be making.
I'm sure it's not.
No, but a point which is a valuable point in what you're raising is that there are very high transaction costs associated with this process of going after people for money, right?
Especially the legal fees, I imagine.
Especially the legal fees. And it's a very time-consuming process, and it also it takes a really long time for it to trickle back to the artists or the songwriters. The songwriters have a similar kind of thing. So, one of the proposals that's been talked about in the U.S. is a kind of copyright small claims court, because what a lot of songwriters have told me is that they're less concerned about getting money when they see repeat infringers, and they're more concerned because they know it's going to be a long process and, you know, a lot of hands in the pot. What they're really more concerned about is stopping the behavior. And so one of the ideas for a copyright small claims court in the U.S. is that you have your typical kind of notice and takedown, and then if there's a counter notification, the copyright owner gets to choose to go to copyright small claims, but not for monetary damages, just for injunctions. And if there are enough injunctions against either the user or the service, there's then a criminal referral to the Department of Justice. That kind of thing, I think, is preferable than trying to go get $5 from somebody or $20 or $100 from somebody who you don't even know, who's like a number, and you got to go through all this procedural stuff to even find out who they are, right? So, you know, going against a limeware, I think makes sense. Going against individual users, I've never thought made sense. It is about the most high transaction cost process that if anyone could imagine, I believe. So do we have any other questions out there?
Hi, I'm Tom Silverman from the New Music Seminar.
Hello, Tom.
How you doing, Chris? Listen, this is an old conversation. I come here every year, we have the same conversation. It's getting a little tired. The governments aren't really changing that much. Piracy is shifting and will continue to shift. And if we eliminated all piracy today, what would we get? A 10%, a 20%, even a 50% increase in the revenues of the music business? We still would be way, way below where we were in 2000, right? My question is the much more important question is how do we build a business from a $23 billion worldwide business to a $100 billion business? If we focus on that question, we'll have a meaningful answer. I didn't hear any answers here today. All we hear is complaints. Yeah, we know piracy sucks, and we know it's hurting artists and labels, and all of us have been decimated by it. But is there another way that we can get to profitability and sustainability again? I think that's the question that's constructive and positive, and we can look at that. Piracy is part of that answer, but it's not the only part of it. And we talk about piracy like it's going to be the panacea and solve our problems. And I don't really think that's going to actually be the case. I wouldn't be satisfied with a 20% increase in the music business. I want to see a 400% increase in the music business, and I think we can get that. I mean, look at how the attention that we create from music is under-monetized. And it's not just because of piracy, that's the smallest part of it. Hani Nada from GGV Capital said last year that 14 hours a week of attention on music is the average that's spent by people to generate $70 billion in revenues, including touring, publishing, and music sales. But sports only has 3.5 hours a week of attention, and they generate $441 billion a year. If we could monetize music at the level that sports monetizes attention, we would be a $1.6 trillion business. Not saying that's possible, but where we are now is pathetic compared to where we could be. How can we monetize attention better? That's the question. And you're bringing up some great points because our music is not being monetized. Whether they're legal, illegal pirates or not legal pirates, terrestrial radio in America doesn't pay artists either. It never has paid artists. The only other countries that don't pay artists, and they use our attention to generate $17 billion a year worth of revenues, is North Korea, Iran, and China. You know, so we're looking at, you know, the biggest pirates in the world, and they've been operating as legal pirates since 1921 when radio began. So really, we have to really talk about the issue in a different way. How can we monetize the attention around music and quadruple the size of the music business? That's the problem.
Well, can I just respond real quick to that, and then you turn it over to you guys? So, Tom, I've heard you make this criticism before, and it's not, what we're talking about today is really different than the conversation, I think, is different than the conversation that usually draws your reaction, which is we're not talking about just piracy. We're talking about the fact that the brands that we normally would be doing business with, and in fact are doing business with in some ways, are monetizing the same content on illegal sites. It's not that it's free, it's not that it's pirate, it's that these same corporations who we're doing business with legitimately are monetizing illegitimate sites, and we'd like to see that revenue shift back over to the legitimate sites, including Pandora, Spotify, and
that's a huge priority for RIAA. It's a huge priority for IFPI, and they're making progress slowly, and I think that we'll move toward that. But at the same time, we have to look at the big picture too. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with this, but if we focus on the negative, if we focus on what's contracted, we can't expand. We have to focus on expansion. You know, I'm on the board of RIAA.
Right, and the point I would make to you is that what we're talking about up here is not focusing on the contraction. We're focusing on the fact that there is an expansion out there, because every one of those transactions on Mega Video was monetized. They just weren't monetized for us, right? So
yeah, they're probably also monetized at a CPM of under 50 cents, which is what's driving it, probably like 10 cents or 5 cents.
Which is what's driving, exactly.
Which isn't really what we want. I mean, we've seen YouTube go from $2 or 50 cents to $20 in some cases for legitimate videos,
right.
You know, for premium content. So that's...
So let me let these guys...
Well, I would just say that actually I find your statements, actually I've heard those statements for 10 years that, oh, we need to, you know, focus on the positive. Don't look over here. Just never mind the fact that this guy's picking your pocket. Let's focus on the positive and figure out how we can make more money to replace that money that's coming out of your pocket.
Of course, that's...
I don't, excuse me?
I'm not saying that, obviously.
Well, yes, you were. I mean, I don't understand why is this always viewed as negative? Like, if I download a piece of software, say the music business is a piece of software, and I've been using it for a while, and I go, you know what, I'm going to write the developers, and for version 2.0, I'm going to come up with some upgrades so that this works better for those participating in the system. That's what I see that I'm doing, is that I'm actually coming up with some upgrades for the music business, and that is positive, that is moving forward, and I don't know. I just noticed that every time people tell me that don't be negative, what they're really saying is never mind that somebody's ripping you off. I mean, this may not be personal to you, but this is literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars out of my family's pockets over the last 10 years.
And
I mean, you can get abstract about it, but I mean, that's the reality. And we're supposed to ignore that? We're supposed to not talk about that?
The same has happened to the record companies and people who used to work in the record business. There's like 70% less people.
I know, and they're pussies for not speaking up about it. And I'm speaking up about it.
So, Tommy, not to cut you off, but we need to take a question. Are these questions from Twitter that I'm seeing up here? Those are ours. Do we have any questions?
Those are the table questions.
Do we have any questions from Twitter? Sorry? You have a question? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I don't mean to interrupt you, but we are soliciting questions from Twitter. So if anybody has them.
So do you want me to tweet my question?
No.
All right, I got it.
But there's somebody out there who's responsible for it. So whoever that is, let me know if I'm stepping on them.
Okay, so hi. I work for a major label, but my background before going to the label was selling internet ads. So for a big ISP and portal. So, you know, I was thinking about all this talk about brand and thinking about the head of GM or Ford or Coke or Pepsi, way up at the top hearing, we ran some ads on, you know, we got a complaint, we ran some ads on a pirate site for Beyonce and Pepsi. And, you know, the guy saying, did we get any clicks? You know, did it drive sales, whatever? You know, yeah, we did, and it cost us 5 cents a click or 2 cents a click or whatever. I think the challenge is, of course, at the top of the companies, these guys don't want to be doing that. But I think the further you go down and you start to look, media buyer, ad agency, networks, they have no clue where their ads are running. And for them, I guess what I'm getting at is, I'm Canadian, I believe in the law, and I am a believer that the only thing that's going to shift this stuff is law. Like, as much as I'm a idealist and I want to believe that people will do good, I just think that the law, if Google, well, first of all, just in the Canadian environment, we don't have Spotify yet. We don't have, Apple hasn't launched a streaming service yet. Google hasn't shown us what they're going to do. As soon as it starts to come out of their pocket, then you'll start to see things move. And I do believe that law is the only way. I really do. You know, these guys, it's too piddly. Start talking about retargeting. Nobody knows where these ads are running. I'm sure at the tops of those companies, they don't want those ads running. It looks bad. I'll bet you they're still running. That's the sad part of it all.
Money changes hands, so you have to eventually know where
Sorry?
it's going. Money changes hands, so somebody somewhere knows where the advertising money. Somebody somewhere knows where those ads ran.
Yeah.
If money changes hands,
Yeah,
somebody
I get
has
that.
to get paid for
Right.
an ad. I'm just pointing that out.
No, and I know that, but what I'm saying is they're buying bulk crap, right? They're basically
Correct.
buying at the low end of the food chain, and they're buying crap, and it's in aggregate, right? It's scale. These guys, you know, sure, somewhere, the network knows that in there were pirate sites, but it's like, what happens with retargeting when I'm going to 15 sites and those ads are following me? You know what I'm saying?
Well, money is still going to the bad sites, so
Right.
that's even if the ads are following you. I mean, however you
Right.
want to arbitrage it morally.
We call this, in the law, we call this a design defect,
Right.
right? Which is, you know, it's kind of like the Pinto. You know, if you remember, the Pinto had the exploding gas tank. Ford didn't get out of liability for the Pinto because they made a lot of them.
Right.
You know, they still had responsibility for
No,
all
I get
of them.
that. I'm just
and
saying.
I hear what you're saying,
Yeah.
and it's always interesting to hear from people who have real world experience in the advertising business, because I'll tell you that it's hard to get somebody to talk about this on the record. And I really appreciate your question, because it's exactly, this is a really important point that she's making, which is at the top of these companies, they typically don't know, and if you call them on it, they'll call somebody, and they'll call somebody, and they'll call somebody, and it'll happen. But we've got our job, I think, as an industry, is to expand that conversation so that we're not chasing something, we're not trying to change something after the fact, that we're trying to change something before the fact.
Can I
So we're
very
gonna-
quickly?
Yeah,
Very
sure.
quickly. I mean, I just want to say that I, for the most part, agree with you. But I would say that this effort of the petition and putting brand-sponsored piracy under a spotlight, the real value of it is making the problem abundantly clear and pointing the way forward to potentially that legislative solution. But before you're going to get there, there needs to be some widespread pressure for that, both from artists and from the industry and from the tech industry as well. And very briefly, I'd just like to respond to the last question. Whatever the potential for the music industry is, however many billions of dollars it is, it's ridiculous to believe that we're going to reach that without establishing basic fairness in the marketplace.
I mean, why wouldn't they steal our future revenue if they're stealing our current revenue?
Well, on that happy note, we're going to start the table discussions now. And so let me just read this, because it's important that we all understand what the ground rules are here. To be successful, the Global Forum encourages in-depth and frank discussions among the participants who represent all aspects of the business, and we help to define the industry viewpoint about the issue discussed. To ensure a candid conversation, all comments and deliberations at your tables during this event must be confidential. Therefore, each year, the entire Global Forum is conducted under the Chatham House rule, which states, when a meeting or part thereof, which is you, is held under the Chatham House rule, participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers nor that of any other participant may be revealed. The rule allows people to speak as individuals and to express views that may not be those of their organizations, and therefore it encourages free discussion. And this includes blogs, tweets, and other postings. So what we're going to do is we have some discussion questions at the table. Each of your tables has a discussion facilitator, and I think a scribe also. And no scribes this year? Okay, no scribe, but we have a facilitator. We'll have discussion for, I think it's 15 minutes. Is it now 15 minutes? Anybody? Let's assume 15 minutes. Okay, great. Starting now. Thank you.